June 1938, France, the World Cup final. The stands are packed. The world is watching. A year later, most of the people in those stands were either in the military, living under occupation, or dead. The 1938 World Cup was one of the strangest tournaments in history because half of the teams that took the field in that tournament would see their countries go to war within a year, some against each other. And the leader of the country that won this tournament used the trophy as a propaganda tool. As we prepare for the 2026 World Cup today, we look back at that tournament, played 88 years ago. Soccer and war, sports and politics, these have never been separate. And 1938 is the year that illustrates this most strikingly. 1938 World Cup Overview. The 1938 World Cup was the third FIFA World Cup. The first was held in Uruguay in 1930, and the second in Italy in 1934. The 1938 tournament was held in France. 15 teams participated. But there is a striking story behind this number. Spain could not participate due to the Spanish Civil War. Austria could not enter the tournament as a separate country because it had been annexed by Germany. It was incorporated into the German squad. Argentina and Uruguay boycotted the tournament because they opposed it being held in Europe. So, even before the tournament began, politics had seeped into every aspect. The tournament format was a single elimination system. One match, the winner advances. Final, Hungary versus Italy. Italy won 4-2. They were champions for the second time in a row. But in this tournament, the process was more important than the result. What happened during that process is still surprising even today. Politics and football. Tension on the field. To understand the 1938 World Cup, one must first understand the atmosphere in Europe at the time. March 1938, 3 months before the tournament, Germany annexed Austria. The Anschluss. Europe was in shock, but no one stopped it. June 1938. The tournament began, and what we saw on the field reflected Europe's map at that moment. The German factor. Germany entered this tournament as a country that had annexed Austria. Some Austrian players were included in the German squad. This was a clear indication that FIFA had bowed to politics. But Germany suffered a disappointment in the tournament. They lost to Switzerland and were eliminated. Italy and the power of propaganda. Italy came into this tournament as a two-time champion and the world's strongest soccer nation. The salute the Italian players performed as they took the field sparked a major backlash across Europe. Fans from some countries protested it, but Italy didn't care. Winning came before everything else, and they won. Winning the tournament was presented as proof of the country's strength. Sports and politics had become intertwined. Cuba's the prize. One of the most fascinating stories of this tournament belongs to Cuba. Cuba advanced to the quarterfinals by defeating Romania in extra time. Even today, very few people know this. The pinnacle of Cuban soccer history occurred in 1938. Brazil and Leonidas. Brazil played fantastic soccer in this tournament. Leonidas da Silva was the tournament's top scorer, netting 8 goals. But Brazil's management made a tactical blunder. They rested Leonidas in the semifinals, saving him for the final. They failed to reach the final. It remains one of the greatest tactical blunders in soccer history. The players and the fate of the war. The most poignant aspect of the 1938 World Cup is this. The fate of most of the players on the field was altered by the war just 1 year later. French players. France was the host nation. But in June 1940, France was invaded. Some of the French players who played in those matches joined the French resistance. Some were taken prisoner. Some lost their lives. Hungarian players. Hungary reached the final in this tournament. It was a great team. But the war struck Hungary as well. Hungary first became an ally of Germany, and by the end of the war, it was occupied by the Soviets. The lives of the players who took the field in that final were shaped by political upheavals. German footballers. Germany was eliminated early, and a year later, Germany launched the war. The majority of the players on that squad were sent to the front lines. Some returned alive. Some did not. Italian footballers. The players of champion Italy found themselves on the battlefields just a few years after lifting the trophy. Italy switched sides in 1943, and during that period, many former players found themselves caught in the midst of both the war and political turmoil. Cuba's players. Perhaps the most interesting story belongs to the Cubans. The players of the Cuban team, which reached the quarterfinals, returned to their country after the tournament. They built careers. They went on with their lives, because Cuba was not involved in that war. Looking at this picture, we see this. The 1938 World Cup was the last peaceful gathering of people who played on the same field, but would be fighting against each other just a few years later, those left out of the tournament. To tell the story of the 1938 World Cup, we must also tell the story of those who weren't on the field. Spain. In 1938, Spain was in the midst of a civil war. Republicans and nationalists were tearing the country apart. Participating in the World Cup was impossible. Some of Spanish soccer's strongest players of that era lost their lives in the Civil War. A soccer nation was being destroyed by war while the World Cup was being played. Austrian footballers. Austria had reached the semi-finals in the 1934 World Cup. They were known as the Wonder Team. But in 1938, they could not enter the tournament as a separate country because Germany had annexed Austria. Some Austrian players were drafted into the German squad. Others refused. This refusal required great courage at the time. Argentina and Uruguay, South America's two major soccer nations, boycotted the tournament. They were protesting the fact that the tournament was being held in Europe again. The continental rivalry that had persisted since 1930 was also evident in soccer. The Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was not a member of FIFA at the time. Therefore, participation was out of the question. But Soviet football was very strong at the time. If they had been on the field, the tournament would have unfolded very differently. The final in the shadow of war. June 19, 1938. Paris Colombe Stadium. Final. Italy 4-2 Hungary. Italy is the champion. The trophy is lifted. The celebrations begin. But an invisible shadow hung over those celebrations. At the time of the final, Europe's political map looked like this. Germany was growing in power. Austria had been annexed. Czechoslovakia was under threat. Spain was in the midst of a civil war. And all the major powers were debating the possibility of war. Exactly 444 days after the final match, on September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. World War II began. Most of the players who had been on the field for that final received the news near the front lines or in occupied cities. And it would take 12 years to hold the next World Cup, until 1950, because the 1942 and 1946 tournaments were canceled. The reason was clear: the war. What happened to soccer during the war? There was no World Cup between 1938 and 1950. But did soccer come to a halt? No. Football in England. The league was suspended in England, but regional tournaments continued. Matches were played on damaged fields under the bombs. For the English people, Football was a symbol of normality. It was the messenger of the message that life goes on. Front lines and football. The legend of those famous matches played during the Christmas truce in World War I was still alive. There are also accounts of football being played on the front lines from time to time during World War II. People felt the need to kick the ball, even in the midst of war. Leagues under occupation. The Football League continued in occupied France. This was controversial. Was it a return to normalcy or an adaptation to the occupation? France is still debating this period today. Which clubs collaborated and which resisted? Footballers on the front lines. Many great footballers went to war. Some returned and continued their careers. Some lost their lives. These losses raise one of the biggest what-if questions in football history. What would have happened if those players hadn't gone to war? From 1938 to 2026, what does the 1938 World Cup teach us? Sports are not independent of politics. They never have been. The 1938 tournament is the most striking proof of this fact. Countries that played on the same field went to war a year later. Soccer players who fought for the same ball found themselves on opposing sides at the front lines. Some of the hands that lifted the trophy soon took up arms. The 2026 World Cup is just around the corner. Politics is present in this tournament as well. Russia is out. North Korea is out. Which countries will participate is a matter of debate. The selection of host countries is a matter of debate. Nothing has changed. Soccer is still entangled in politics. Politics is still entangled in soccer. But one thing has changed. For the soccer players who took the field in 1938, war was an unimaginable future. For the players who will take the field in 2026, war is something read about in history books. And this difference is the result of the price paid by millions of people over the past 88 years. In the next section, we ask, why was the 1942 World Cup canceled? And where were the players who were supposed to play in that tournament?